Today, I want to talk to you about telling the whole truth. You may be seated. Telling the whole truth. Now here Paul is in Caesarea, and the chief priest and all of the Jewish council and the religious leaders, they are bringing these charges against Paul. But we see in the text today, they don't have any evidence to support their charges. And so Paul says, I don't have time to deal with these petty trials. Take me on to Caesar. Take me to the Supreme Court, and I will defend myself there. And so he says, here's Paul says, if I have done anything wrong, I'm not going to refuse to die, because we know Paul was willing to die for the gospel. And he was willing to stand on the truth no matter what. And friends, if we are sent by God, we're going to have to tell the whole truth. We can't tell just part of the truth so we won't offend anybody, or just part of the truth so we make people feel good about their sin. We have to tell the whole truth. So Paul comes and he says, I'm going to tell the whole truth. Now, you may not have said it yourselves, but you've probably seen it on TV, or you've served as a juror in the courtroom, and you've heard the bailiff or the judge ask the witness before they testify to raise their right hand. And the judge or the bailiff will say to the witness, do you solemnly swear or affirm that the evidence or the testimony that you are about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? There was a time when it said, so help me God. And there was a time when you put your hand on a Bible. But we know we live in a post-Christian America. And so you had to affirm that what the testimony that you were about to give was the whole truth and nothing but the whole truth. Here's what I like about God. This is the first point we see in the text, is that when we tell the whole truth, God protects us when we tell the whole truth. And look at how God protected Paul. So Paul, they had requested Festus as a favor, because the Jews thought they could manipulate Festus into doing what they wanted him to do. So they said, we're going to request Festus. And y'all, Festus was the governor. He was the governor who had been appointed by the emperor of Rome, Nero. And so they said, we're going to request Festus, but here's what Festus does. Festus was known as an honest and a conscientious man. So here, out of all the people that Paul could have been sent before, God protects him because he's telling the whole truth. He sends him before an honest and a conscientious man. And here's what Festus says. Festus says, I can't just rely on y'all statements alone. I need some other evidence. I need some other evidence of what y'all saying to be true. So here's what Festus does is Festus says, hey, let me bring him up. And guess what they were trying to do? They wanted Festus to order that Paul be sent back to Jerusalem so they could have him ambushed and killed. But can I just tell you, when you are telling the whole truth, God will send his angels and he'll cap them all around you. So when the enemy tries to take you out, they can't take you out. So here's what Festus says. Festus says, no, we're not sending him back to Jerusalem. He's in Caesarea, so you can bring some of your leaders with me, because I'm going to Caesarea. And so he goes to Caesarea with the Jewish leaders, because he wanted to make sure that Paul was treated fairly. And that's how God protects us when we're telling the whole truth. He says, you don't have to change your story to appease the audience. You just need to tell the whole truth. And so here, Governor Festus reveals, at first he tells them, hey, we're just going to go here to Caesarea because that's where Paul is. But that wasn't the real reason why he was going to Caesarea, and he didn't want to transfer them back. You'll see later on in Acts 25, in verses 17 through 20, Governor Festus reveals the real reason he was delaying Paul's trial, and he did not want to return Paul to Jerusalem. He says to the King Agrippa, he tells King Agrippa that when he heard the case against Paul, because it was not about any of the crimes he expected, but it was about their religion. It was about a dead man named Jesus, who Paul insisted was alive, and he, Governor Festus, did not have any way to investigate those claims. That is why he didn't want to make a decision on the case, because he says, this is not about him doing something wrong. This is about religion and a dead man named Jesus. Anybody in here willing to testify that Jesus is alive? Anybody want to be exhibit A and B and C? Because you can testify that he's not dead, that he is alive. And so that is why he wanted to send Paul, and he wanted the trial to take place. So here it is. He wants this to take place there because he says, I want you, King Agrippa, because although King Agrippa was not a Christian, remember, King Agrippa was in Rome. So he was Roman, he was not a Christian, but he was often sought after to handle the religious conflicts of the day. So he says, I want to bring you to King Agrippa because you are used to dealing with these religious matters. So I'm going to ask you to help me out. So the first thing we see is the text is that God always protects us when we're telling the whole truth. But here it is. Point 2 is God always provides an audience to hear the whole truth. Sometimes people won't want to hear the truth, but God always provides an audience to hear the whole truth. So here's what we see in verse 22. Then Agrippa said to Festus, so Festus, Governor Festus has presented Paul to King Agrippa. And then Agrippa said to Festus, I would like to hear this man myself. So friends, we don't have to shy away from telling the whole truth because God always provides an audience. I know we live in a time where truth is relative, where people don't believe in an absolute truth. And sometimes people don't want to hear the truth. But can I tell you, when you are telling the truth about God, he will always provide an audience of people that want to hear the truth. So then the next day, Festus tells Agrippa, tomorrow you will hear him. And so here is Paul before Agrippa. The next day, Agrippa and Bernice came. They came with great pomp and circumstance because they're the king, and Bernice is King Agrippa's sister. Now, this was a little drama, y'all, because the Jewish people didn't really like King Agrippa. So, because he wasn't Jewish, but also they didn't like the fact that Bernice was his sister, and he kind of had a relationship with Bernice. So, you figure that out on your way home. Okay, but because he was respected by the Romans and they're in the Roman court, they wanted King Agrippa. So they come in with all this pomp and circumstances. They got these military leaders and officers with them. So they arrive. And then Festus said, King Agrippa and all who are present with us, this is verse 26, he says, you see this man? The whole Jewish community has petitioned me about him in Jerusalem and here in Caesarea, shouting that he ought not to live any longer. And here's what Governor Festus says. I found he had done nothing deserving of death, but because he made his appeal to the emperor, I decided to send him to Rome. But I have nothing definite to write to his majesty about him. Therefore, I have brought him before all of you, and especially before you, King Agrippa, so that as a result of this investigation, I may have something to write. Can I tell you, sometimes when you tell the truth, people will go, they launch an investigation to get something to write about you. Because he said, I don't have anything, but I'm looking for something to write. But he goes on to say, because he's a conscientious and an honest man, he says, for I think it is unreasonable to send a prisoner on to Rome without specifying the charges against him. So you're probably familiar with the concept of due process, right? You got it. We have it in the amendments to the Constitution. And what it tells us is that people are entitled to receive first notice of the charges against them, and then they are required to be given an opportunity to be heard, to be able to defend against the charges against them. So we may think the U.S. Constitution, the 14th and the 5th Amendment, that, oh, that's something new. Friend, no, due process came from the Bible. That is what our God says, is that you got to have notice and hearings of the charges against you. And so here it is, Festus, the honest man, said, it's unreasonable for me to send him to trial if he doesn't have notice of the charges against him, and if I don't give him an opportunity to defend himself against the charges. So here, not only was it due process, but it was a fundamental right of Roman law that you had to receive notice and an opportunity to be heard. And so then this King Agrippa, just to tell you a little bit about him, he was King Agrippa II, which was the son of King Herod Agrippa the first, who was the grandson of King Herod the Great. So King Agrippa, he was the last one in the King Herod dynasty to take the throne in Rome. And so he was, as people say, he was in high cotton, y'all. So he was big time. He was an influencer, okay? He was an influencer. And so therefore, he was the man. And so he was not the people, like I said, among the Jews. They didn't really care for him because of his outside behavior with Bernice. But because of where he was sitting in Rome, he was somebody. And so remember that the main purpose of the hearing was to gather something that they could write and send to the emperor in Rome against Paul. That was the main purpose of the hearing. So Governor Festus wanted to find something to write, although Governor Festus had already admitted what? That he had found nothing deserving of death. And can I just tell you, God always provides an audience for the whole truth. So not only does he protect us when we tell the whole truth, he provides an audience to hear the whole truth. But here it is, point 3. Our enemies and our accusers cannot prevent the whole truth from being told. Because can I just tell you, sometimes people don't want the real truth to come out. They don't want the real tea to be spilled. And so that's why they wanted to kill him, and they wanted to send him to Jerusalem so they could have an ambush and kill him. Because some people want to silence the truth. We live in a culture that wants to silence the truth. I digress. We do, right? We don't want the whole truth. We want a piece of the truth, or we want a narrative that we have created as the truth. But there's only one truth, and we know that truth to be what? The Word of God. The Word of God. And so here it is. Paul was on trial for his life. He was facing the death penalty, y'all. Because if he was guilty of what they said he was, the punishment was death. So this was not just any trial with some charges, because he had faced prison over and over. So he wasn't afraid of prison. And he tell you, he wasn't even afraid of death, because he knew he would stand for Christ, and he would rather die than to disown Christ. And so he stood for him. And so here it is, Acts 26, verses 1 through 3. Then Agrippa said to Paul, "You have permission to speak for yourself." So Paul motioned with his hand and began his defense. "King Agrippa," he said, "I consider myself fortunate to stand before you today as I make my defense against all the accusations of the Jews. And especially so because you are well acquainted with all the Jewish customs and controversies. Therefore, I beg you to listen to me patiently." So here are some things I want to point out that Paul highlights in his defense. First of all, when you are defending yourself, friend, you got to tell the story, and you got to tell the whole truth, because you got to paint the picture. And here's what Paul does. He paints the picture. The first thing Paul tells King Agrippa is that he says, first of all, I want you to know that all the preaching I have done has been consistent with the Jewish faith. He said, I haven't been preaching anything that has not been consistent with the Jewish faith. So let me just tell us this, beloveds. When we are standing on trial, we need to make sure that we've been doing what we're supposed to be doing, all right? That's when we have God's protection, when we are doing what we're supposed to be doing. So Paul says, I haven't been doing anything inconsistent with the Jewish faith. Then he says, and let me tell you about my background as a Pharisee. I've been trained in the rules and the regulations of Jewish customs. I know what the rules are. And so I have taken very care that I did not disobey them and that I did not violate them. And so that's what he goes on to tell him. And then Paul tells King Agrippa about how he grew up and how he was always conformed to the strictest sect of their religion because he was a Pharisee. So he was very strict in following the rules and regulations. And he says that he is on trial because he has hope in God and in God's resurrection. So he said, let me tell you why I'm on trial. I'm not on trial because I violated any customs or rule. I'm on trial because I believe in Jesus and I believe in the hope of his resurrection. He said, that's why I'm on trial. These are the 2 points. And then Paul goes on to tell him about his conversion. Paul begins to paint the vision for King Agrippa and Bernice and all of those in the room, he says, you remember back in Acts 9, I was on the Damascus road. I was cursing. I was persecuting Christians. I was killing Christians. And then I had an encounter with the one. He said, and the Lord, when I had that encounter, it wasn't just any old encounter, friend. The Lord struck me down. I was blind. I could not see, but he opened my eyes and he called me to this work. So he says, because he called me, I cannot do anything else but tell the whole truth. He said, if he had not called me, I wouldn't be telling the whole truth. But because he called me, I'm going to tell the whole truth. So Paul begins to paint the picture. And he says, not only did he call me, but he gave me a specific assignment. He did not just call me to the Jews, but he called me to the Gentiles so that everybody might have an opportunity for this hope that I have in Jesus Christ. And then what he does, friend, he lays out for them the path to salvation. So you can imagine King Agrippa and Bernice and all the military officers, they're sitting there, they're listening as he paints the picture of this amazing God and how God arrested his attention and called him to be on the Lord's side. Then he says, not only that, I have experienced God's protection because I was walking in my purpose. So I've been in jail, I've been in shackles, I've been in chains, I've been beaten, but I've been protected. Because I'm standing before you today. They wanted to kill me, but I'm still standing before you today. So Paul began to testify about what he had experienced in God. And then at the end, like any good preacher would, Paul says, this invitation was not only for me, friends. He said, but this invitation is for you too. He said, I want to extend this invitation. He ain't just calling me. He's calling everybody who will answer his call. And guess what? At this invitation, guess what the text tells us? That at this point, Festus interrupted Paul's defense. Can I just tell you, when the truth gets too good, sometimes people will interrupt you. They'll want you to shut up. They'll try to silence you. So he says to Paul, you are out of your mind, Paul. He shouted, your great learning is driving you insane. Now remember, Festus was also a Roman. So really, he thought what Paul was saying was crazy. You talking about a man named Jesus, he done died and he raised from the dead. He was speaking to you from heaven. He calls you. This is crazy. So he really did think what Paul was talking about was crazy. And so guess what? Look at how Paul responds though. Paul did not entertain Festus' criticism, but he responded simply by saying, in verse 25, he says, I am not insane, most excellent Festus. Paul replied. Guess what? He continued to show Festus respect because the truth does not have to be rude, judgmental, or attacking. Even when you cannot respect the person because what they have done to you or what they've said about you, respect their position. And that's what Paul did here. He said he's the governor. So he says, I am not insane, most excellent Festus. He addressed him by his name, by his official title and his role. And guess what? Paul stayed focused on why he was there. He could have taken the opportunity to address Festus' accusation and criticism of calling him crazy. But can I tell you, don't be tempted to lose focus. Paul remembered why he was there. He was not there to defend against Festus, friends. He was there to defend against the claims of the Jews. So Paul says, I'm staying on task. So when you're telling the whole truth, friend, don't be distracted. Stay on task. And so that's what Paul did. He said here, Paul was there to testify to the truth about what he believed and about his actions. So he was not there to clap back on Festus. We have to be careful because we be ready to clap back. And let me tell you, criticism can only take center stage if you give it an audience. It can only take center stage if you give it an audience. Therefore, Paul moved on quickly and refocused the conversation back to King Agrippa because Paul was like, talk to the hand. I'm here to talk to King Agrippa. And he says, none of this has escaped his notice because it was not done in a corner. And this is what Paul is saying to King Agrippa. He says, You are aware of all the major events of the Christian faith. You know all of these things that have happened, and you know these events have been recorded in a public record. They have been witnessed by many. And Paul says they weren't done in a corner. You know all of the events that people have testified about that happened when Jesus walked this earth. And King Agrippa had no doubt heard about it and knew that he could not invalidate them. And guess what? Paul is confident because he goes on to ask King Agrippa directly. In verse 27, he says, King Agrippa, do you believe the prophets? And then Paul answers before he has a chance to answer. He says, I know you do. I know you do. Paul says, I know you do. And so then Agrippa said to Paul, do you think that this is verse 28, in such a short time you can persuade me to be a Christian? Paul replies, short time or long? I pray to God that not only you, but all who are listening to me today may become what I am, except for these chains. So Paul says, short time or long, friend, the truth is the truth, friend. And so you can receive it today, or you don't have to receive it. But I'm praying that you receive it. That's what Paul said to him. And so guess what happened then? So Paul's confidence was not in himself, but it was in the gospel of Jesus Christ. It was in the whole truth. So don't miss that. Paul wasn't cocky and confident that he had the ability to persuade King Agrippa. He was cocky and confident that the word of God had the ability to touch the heart of King Agrippa. That's what he was focused on. So as followers of Christ, the truth of God is where we find our confidence. Paul was bold and unapologetic. Notice King Agrippa's deflection, because King Agrippa was in a precarious situation. He could not say that he agreed with Paul and that he believed the prophets, because then that would say he believed in Christianity and he would upset the Jews. But he could not say he didn't believe in the prophets, because then he knew he would have to send an innocent man to be charged with death. So guess what King Agrippa does? He does the next best thing. He exits stage left. Y'all, look at verse 30. The king rose, and with him the governor and Bernice and those sitting with him. After they left the room, they began saying to one another, this man is not doing anything that deserves death or imprisonment, friend. They wouldn't say it in public, but they said it in private. And can I just tell you that sometimes people may not acknowledge that you are telling the whole truth to your face? But it didn't matter, because the outcome was the same. They didn't have to tell Paul to his face that he was telling the truth. The outcome was the same. He wasn't sentenced to death. So it didn't matter whether they told him to his face or whether they said it in private, because the outcome was the same. Sometimes we look for others to affirm the truth that we are telling. They may never affirm that you're telling the truth, friend. But that's okay, as long as the outcome is the same. And that's what it was for Paul. The outcome was the same. Paul had proved his case, and the verdict was not guilty. So they said, Paul, we're going to send you on to Rome, so you ain't getting death down here. And really, King Agrippa said he would have been acquitted right here if he hadn't requested to go on to Rome. But since he requested to go on to Rome, we're going to go ahead and send him to Rome. But once again, Festus didn't have anything to write in the charges against Paul. But Paul was going to be sent to Rome. I was watching a movie, and one of the actors made this profound statement, although it was not a Christian movie at all. He did make this profound statement, though. He said, the truth is the only safe ground to stand upon. And that is it, because the truth never wavers. The truth never changes. Truth may not gain you favor with man, but it will with God. We are living in a time that Paul speaks about in the text. Many do not value truth. In fact, there are those who will believe a lie in spite of the truth being right in front of them. That is what we live in. We live in a post-Christian America, and many believe there is no absolute truth. In their opinion, truth is relative. Everyone can choose their own truth. But as Christians, we know that there's only one truth, and that's God's truth. So we must tell the truth in season and out of season. Whether it feels good or not, we must tell the truth. Now is not the time to shrink back. We must be bold in speaking the truth in love. There's a way to speak the truth. Again, Paul did not speak the truth arrogantly, attacking, aggressive. He just spoke it in love. We got to speak the truth in love. In 2 Timothy 4, verses 3-4, Paul warns Timothy. He says, for the time will come when people will not put up with sound doctrine. And can I tell you that time is here? People don't want to hear the sound doctrine. They don't want to hear the truth. He said, instead, to suit their own desires, they will gather around them a great number of teachers to say what their itching ears want to hear. Because the truth may not have as many followers, but it's still the truth. Don't always look at the number of followers to tell that somebody is doing what's right. They will turn their ears away from the truth and turn aside to myth. Paul reminds us that there is a weight that comes when we tell the truth. He admonishes that we are all called, not just as preachers, not just as deacons, elders, deaconess, we are all called. If you are a believer in Jesus Christ, you are called to tell the whole truth. You are called to tell the whole truth. And we are even called to tell it even when we are not following his truth. Too many times as Christians, we shrink back because we feel like we have that same sin struggle, or we have a past sin, so how can I tell you about being in that sin because I was once caught up in that? It doesn't matter. We still need to speak the whole truth. Even if it's my sin, I can say to you, friend, I'm wrong for doing it and so are you. Because that's not what thus say the Lord. So we need to be able to tell the whole truth. And we need to do it with a sense of urgency. Why? Because our children, the next generation, are confused about what is the truth. Because we are not telling the whole truth. We must tell the whole truth. And can I just tell you, God has given each of us assignment. And he will grade us on how well we fulfilled our assignment. Before I take my seat, can I just tell you about a couple people that told the truth? You remember Daniel? Daniel was a man of God. And then the king issued this edict that no one could pray to any god except King Darius. And so he told them, Daniel was used to praying several times a day. And he told all over the country that, hey, you can't pray to any god except the king. And if you're caught praying to anybody except the king, you're going to be thrown in the lion's den. Daniel heard the edict. And Daniel continued praying. Daniel said, I'm going to continue praying because I know the whole truth. And the whole truth is there is only one God. There is no other God beside the God, the creator of heaven and earth. And so Daniel continued to pray. And guess what? When he continued to pray, he was thrown into the lion's den. But because Daniel refused to bow down to the culture and to stand for the truth of God's word, God protected him while he was in the lion's den. He came out. He didn't lose his life. He came out on the other side because he was standing for the whole truth. Can I tell you about Peter? Peter told the whole truth. In fact, because he was telling the whole truth, he was thrown into jail. Him and Silas was in prison, and they were awaiting trial for their faith in Jesus Christ. And as they were waiting trial, friend, can I tell you, the Concord Church of the New Testament was praying for him. They had a prayer meeting. And they were praying for him. And so as they were praying, friend, all of a sudden the angels opened up the gates to the jail. And he walked out of the jail because he was standing for the truth. Because what? God protects us when we tell the whole truth. Let me tell you about my girl Esther. Y'all remember Esther? You know, she thought she was just called to be queen. And she thought she was just called to be beautiful. But God said, I didn't just put you there to look good, friend. I put you there for a reason. So she had been lying. She had been lying about who she was. She didn't tell him she was a Jew, right? But then God told her she had an opportunity to stand and tell the whole truth. That she was, in fact, when Haman issued that edict, got the king to issue the edict to kill all Jews, her cousin Mordecai said, hey, don't think because you're the queen, you're going to be spared. You're Jewish too, so you better do something. And if you don't do something, God will send help from somewhere else. So here's what Esther do. She go to fasting and she go to praying. And Esther made up in her mind that she was going to tell the whole truth. And when she told the whole truth, God used her to save his people. Not only that, friends, when we tell the whole truth, it's not just about us. We save other people. We cause other people to come into the knowledge of the whole truth. And this is my favorite. You remember those 3 Hebrew boys. You know, Shadrach, Meshach, and as Dr. Freddie Haynes would say, a bad Negro, Abednego. And so you remember King Nebuchadnezzar, he'd build this golden image, and he said, hey, when I play the music, friend, he said, when I play the music, y'all know the music, right? It wasn't the music we playing here, it was the music they play out there. So, you know, when they the music get people to dance for, you know how we do when they put the slide song on, Boots on the Ground. When he played Boots on the Ground, that's what they were saying. When he played Boots on the Ground, y'all bow down to this golden image. So the 3 Hebrew boys said, we're not doing that because we know the whole truth. So we know we can't bow down to this image and then also bow down to our Father. So we're going to refrain from this. And so word got back to King Nebuchadnezzar that, hey, these people ain't bowing down. They heard what you said, but they ain't bowing down. And you even have them as officers in your cabinet. And they still ain't doing what you said. So what King Nebuchadnezzar did? He gets upset, y'all. He like, no, they didn't. No, we throwing them in the furnace. And he says, as a matter of fact, we going to turn the furnace up 7 times hotter than it normally is because they need to do what I say do. And guess what they did, friend? They said, okay. He comes to them, and he tells them that, hey, I understand you're not worshiping the golden image. And he summons them, and then the boys responded. This is how they responded. This is how you can respond when you tell them the whole truth. The boys responded, King Nebuchadnezzar, we do not need to defend ourselves before you in this matter. If we are thrown into the blazing furnace, the God we serve is able to deliver us from it. And he will deliver us from your majesty's hand. But even if he does not, we want you to know, your majesty, that we will not serve your gods or worship the image of gold you have set up. Not only did God deliver the Hebrew boys from the fire, can I just tell you, he got in the fire with them. They looked up and they said, I thought it was 3 men in the fire. Now it's 4 men in the fire. And guess what? Not only that, when they came out of the fire, all of the royal advisors, the governors and the satraps and all of the officials, friend, they were checking and they were expecting the boys and they looking at them. And they were like, oh my God, the fire has not harmed their bodies, nor was their hair on their head singed, and then their robes were not scorched. Look here, they don't even smell like smoke. That's what the God will do. When you tell the whole truth, friend, he'll take you through the fire, but he'll get in there with you, and then you'll come out, and you won't smell like smoke. But can I just tell you, not only did he bring them out of the fire, they got promoted. Y'all, look at what the king did. The king said, you done stood for your God. I'm going to promote you, friend, because I want your God. So then the king promoted them. And here's what he says. Here's what the king says. He said, praise be to the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who has sent his angel and rescued his servants. They trusted in him and defied the king's command and were willing to give up their lives rather than serve or worship any God except their own God. Therefore, I decree that the people of any nation or language who say anything against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego be cut into pieces, and their houses be burned, be turned into piles of rubble. For no other God can save this way. Then the king promoted Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Can I just tell you, when you tell the whole truth, he'll promote you, friend. He'll even cause your enemy to promote you, because that's just what he does. So you've been sent, friends, not only to walk in your purpose, but you've been sent to tell the whole truth. Don't listen to what the world is telling you. There is only one truth. And today, as I close out this message, there may be someone here today. If you'll just stand with me, there may be someone here today that you have been listening to the lies of the world. They have told you that you will make it to heaven because you're a good person. But can I just tell you, there's nothing good in any of us but for the goodness of God that he puts in us.